Sam with a quick astrology update here on March 10th, 2013. We have Mars and Saturn continuing retrograde in Libra, bringing a lot of intensity around world affairs, world issues. Of course, the big story of the last week or so has been the Russian annexing of Crimea and the sort of international incident that is unraveling or unfolding on the global theater right now. I did a video and an article last week about how literally 60 years earlier, on February 28th, 1954, Nikita Khrushchev took the Crimea, gave the Crimea to the Ukrainians, and then exactly 60 years later, Putin takes it back, which is very interesting. There's another big story that's been kind of world news the last couple weeks, and that has to do with the so-called Blade Runner, the athlete who has been accused of murdering his girlfriend on February 14th, 2013, in the early morning hours in South Africa. He has admitted to killing her, but he said it was due to a mistake, thinking that she was an intruder. And of course, the prosecution says no, there's ample evidence to support that it was a murder. That in fact his allegation that he thought she was an intruder is contradicted by evidence. Now, he was born on November 22nd, 1986, and it's said to be between 10:30 and 11:30 a.m. in South Africa. Now, if we look at the 10:30 time, this would give a Capricorn rising sign, and there would be Jupiter, Mars in Aquarius in the second house, Rahu in Pisces in the third house, the moon would be in the seventh house in Cancer. I have looked at this and I have determined that my feeling is the rising sign is Aquarius. This would put Mars in the first house, and also, most importantly, it would put Ketu in his 8th house, because regardless, either one of those, any of those times, whether it's 10:30 or 11:30, and it's pretty corroborated that this is the birth time. It's what's called the Rodin rating of an A. There's a first-hand witness account that said that he was born between 10:30 and 11:30 in the morning. Any of those times would have this murder occurring in Ketu Dasha. If it's the 10:30, if it's the Capricorn rising sign, or really from 10:30 till about 11:20, then Ketu's in the 9th house. But after 11:20 or so, when it gets to be around 11:30, the rising sign becomes Aquarius, and Ketu goes into the 8th house, which means that this murder or this killing would have happened right at the beginning of his Ketu Dasha. And it happens at the beginning of his Ketu Dasha either way, but it would be Ketu in the 8th house with the notorious killing, rather than Ketu in the 9th house, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. It does not make a lot of sense at all that he would start his Ketu Dasha and it would be Ketu in the 9th. Whereas the 9th house doesn't really have anything to do with murder or with killing. It does have to do with a legal battle, for sure, but such a notorious, tragic, and sudden, shocking event has 8th house written all over it. The other thing that happens when we make the ascendant Aquarius is he winds up with Mars very close to the ascendant. So if I put the time at 11:30 a.m., it's 2 degrees of Aquarius, and Mars is in the first house at about 3 degrees, so it's right on the ascendant, which definitely jives with an athlete. It also jives with what a lot of people have said about him. which is that he had a pretty nasty temper and a tendency to snap very easily. It also puts Sun and Saturn in his 10th house, which is not incongruent with an athlete who is also notorious for being handicapped, because Saturn has to do with handicap, and it literally means lame, or it's literally of being of what they call lameness, which is where people can't walk so well. So especially having that be part of his career, Sun Saturn in the 10th house, and also shows in his Mercury dasha. Mercury would be his 5th and 8th lord, 5th and 8th house ruler in his 9th house. So it shows that his previous Mercury dasha would have been very sort of blessed, you would say, because it's in his 9th house and with the 9th house ruler. So I tend to favor the Aquarius time, or the Aquarius ascendant, over the Capricorn ascendant. Either way, it puts his Ketu dasha at the as the timing for this tragic event. Now, it would have happened, well, it happened on the early morning hours of February 14th, 2013, at which time Mercury, Mars, and the Sun would have been in Aquarius, which would be what I would consider to be his first house, and the Sun would have been going right over his ascendant on that day, and also Rahu and Saturn would have been in his, would have been going through his 9th house. Saturn would have been, right on his natal Mercury, and have just gone over his natal Venus. So you see both Rahu and Saturn very prominent in his 9th house, which has to do with the legal system, and it's still there, obviously. This trial would have started right when Mars had gone into Libra and turned retrograde, because right now we have Saturn-Mars retrograde, and that's the current chart, and it shows this kind of reversing of things in his legal life, because the 9th house does have to do with the legal system. So having Saturn and Mars both retrograde in what would be his 9th house rather than his 10th house if it's Capricorn also makes more sense to me. So, these are a few world events right now that we're all kind of dealing with, and it's very interesting with this with this Pistorius character. With the Aquarius rising sun, we also get the moon in the 6th house, which also again makes a lot more sense than having moon in the 7th house, because the moon in the 6th house is known to be what's called an Arishta Yoga, which means, or even what you would call Balarishta, which means a child born who is sick. And he was born this way. So the moon in the 6th house is a classic placement of a Balarishta Yoga, which is when a child is born unhealthy, as he was. And you can even take it further. The sign of Aquarius has to do with the body part that he was born, that was born injured in him. The sign of Capricorn has to do with the knees, but his injury is not the knee, it's below the knee. It's actually, he was born without a tibia, I believe, one of the bones in the lower leg. Our calf is formed by 2 bones, and he was born without one of them. So it's that body part that has to do with Aquarius. Another reason why I tend to favor Aquarius. And that moon in the 6th house, will make for a mindset that is shows a bit of struggle getting through life. And the other thing about the Ketu is Ketu is aspected by Mars. The 8th house aspect of Mars is on Ketu by the 8th house aspect of Mars. So again, that brings a lot of 8th house qualities to his Ketu dasha, which would have started at the end of 2012. He would have just been a couple months into Ketu when that death occurred. So we'll have to see how this plays out. Of course, it's a very tragic event to see someone perish this way, by all accounts, his girlfriend, Ms. Steenkamp, was a beloved figure, and of course no one likes to see someone perish this way. But it's an interesting case study in astrology, and I thought I would discuss it because it gives us a chance to look at the rising signs and also the world events and the planetary transits as they're moving right now. So hopefully the other world events that are playing out relative to Russia and the Crimea will become diffused. I invite you to also look at the extensive case study that I did on the Crimea and the Ukraine situation. This really started 60 years ago when Khrushchev gave the Crimea back to the Ukrainians. Then it was revisited in the Cold War when Yeltsin made a deal. I believe what happened is Yeltsin made a deal with the Ukrainians over Crimea that they could have a port in Sevastopol in order for the exchange of their nuclear weapons. So the Crimea has been a bargaining chip for 60 years, and now with Russian occupation and a sort of referendum of whether or not to give it back to the Russian people, the world is really wondering what to do about this. So, besides that, this week we have the moon going through that section of the zodiac between Gemini and Virgo. So it's a time for using your skills and your intelligence and your communication. And I'll have a video later in the week on the full moon, because we have the full moon at the end of this week. So have a good one.